Hey, good morning. Happy Sunday. It's Dr. Bill, and it's time for another episode of Beyond Limits, where spirit meets science. I've had a little bit of a hiatus here because I was traveling and also working on the new book. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But today's theme is kind of in alignment with that, which is sometimes things change for us really quickly and we have to pivot, and we're going to talk about living in the flow. And this is inspired by the 8th verse of the Tao Te Ching, which stands for Book of the Way, for those that don't know that. But this flow concept is something that's going to be present within our personal lives and our business and our careers and everything that we do. And so the podcast is continuing to evolve. And as I just mentioned, I was working on a new book. And this came from inspiration from my own inspiration of contemplating writing a book for business leaders, and also to validate that, I've had like half a dozen, I don't know how many people now, 3 or 4 people, whatever, reached out on LinkedIn, or they emailed me. In fact, I just had one 2 days ago that reached out to me and said, hey, have you thought about writing a book for business? And so if you've been to my website, which by the way is drbillclark.life, if you've been to the website, then you see I've got 4 books listed there, and they're all different themes in terms of inspirational, spiritual, whatever. And I had contemplated doing a business book before, but not really seriously moving forward with that. But after all the inspiration and the feedback that I've gotten, I thought, okay, let's see what we can do with that. So I've actually taken the 80 talks that I've given over the year, 80, I couldn't believe it was that many, over the years, and taken the transcripts from all of those, and that's being distilled down into this business book and conscious leadership or whatever. So the book is a guide for high-performing leaders, entrepreneurs, seekers who want to live and lead beyond limits, which is the theme of this podcast, about beyond limits. And I blend universal spiritual truths, lived resilience of my own stories that I share, and scientific principles to reveal how truth, resilience, and alignment can transform leadership in life. So it's more than a conscious leadership manual, which is very targeted towards how to run organizations. It's more of a field guide to harmonizing your body, spirit, and purpose in an age that demands both innovation and authenticity. So that's the positioning statement there for the book. So I don't have a working title yet for that. Call it Conscious Leadership, Beyond Limits, where Spirit Meets Science, integration, mystic with a modern edge, and that sort of thing. So really unique. I've actually talked to others who actually work with authors and talked to them about my concept, and they think this is really awesome. They've never seen anything out there exactly like this, and of course it's really just because of my own unique voice and my own journey that I've had for decades in terms of my spiritual journey. So again, it'll be positioned as a spiritual principle and a practical leadership strategy for the book. And speaking of books, if you didn't know already or hadn't watched my posts, here's my new book. The first one, Divine Whispers, Poems of Love and Spirit. You can get it on the website. It'll take you over to Amazon, and you can find it there. It's a compilation of poems that I wrote over a 15-year period through my whole journey and different things going on in my life at those times. Each poem has a story behind it. You may be able to gather from reading the poem what's the story about in some sense, but not really the full details of that. Of course, I'll share that as I do more of my podcasts and stuff like that here. I probably will do that. But it's a powerful manual, and I recommend you go get it. And if you do, please leave a review on Amazon. I've already got a couple of reviews up there. They're really nice reviews, which is awesome. And I'm getting great feedback from the book. So if you haven't gotten it yet, go get your copy. And my only recommendation is, when you're reading it, don't dive into it and read page. This is not a comic book or fast reading novel that you need to read through it. This is a journey. Keep in mind that this was compiled over a 15-year period. So, take one poem at a time and see how that resonates with you and deep dive with that. So that's my recommendation of how to approach reading the book. There's a total of 32 poems. So take one a day or one every 2 or 3 days or something like that to do that and go through it. So let's get to today's episode, which is really about living in the flow. And again, as I mentioned, it's inspired by the Tao Te Ching. And by the way, the Tao Te Ching, for those who don't know, was written by Lao Tzu like 2,500 years ago. Okay, there's 81 verses in there, and still the wisdom from those words are still valuable today and still apply to our lives today. So I think that if you haven't read the Tao Te Ching, I think I've read it like 4 times myself, several times over the years, and I always get something new out of it when I go through and read it. And by the way, one of my books, Quantum Grace, Contemplations for the Spiritual Journey, is my version of the Tao Te Ching, so to speak. There's probably about 100 inspirational messages in there, and that's in process. I'm compiling that right now. I've been writing for years on that one. But first is the Conscious Leadership Spirit Meets Science book. That's going to be next, and that'll be aligned with the upcoming TEDx talk. We're in the process of looking for the stage for that. But anyway, back to the 8th verse of the Tao. So if you haven't heard the 8th verse of the Tao, let me read that first, because it'll set the stage for our discussion today. And it goes like this. The supreme good is like water, which nourishes all things without trying to. It flows to low places, loathed by all men. Therefore it is like the Tao. Live in accordance with the nature of things. In dwelling, be close to the land. In meditation, go deep in the heart. In dealing with others, be gentle and kind. Stand by your word. Govern with equity. Be timely in choosing the right moment. One who lives in accordance with nature does not go against the way of things. He moves in harmony with the present moment, always knowing the truth of just what to do. That's a powerful verse, and it's one of my favorites in the Tao. And again, Tao Te Ching translates to Book of the Way. Jing is book, and Tao means the way. And so if you think about water and the metaphor for that, it's a metaphor for life and leadership. It's gentle, it's adaptive, it's nourishing, and it's resilient. And scientifically speaking, our bodies are made up of about 75% water, our brains like 85%. So we are mostly water. So on an energetic level, aligning with being in the flow, it aligns with the energetic flow of our bodies in terms of health and less stress and all that. And we'll talk about some practices later of how we can embody living in the flow in our lives, in both life and leadership. Now, there's some stories I can share, a personal story and then another book that I read about stories of flow. And the first one's a metaphor. And I don't know if you've read the book by Herman Hesse called Siddhartha. And it's really the story of this Hindu prince on this journey, on his spiritual journey, who sheds off all his wealth and belongings and everything and goes on a journey. I read it years ago. I don't remember exactly all the details, but it is a novel written by a German poet, but it is actually supposed to be aligned to the story of actually Buddha and his journey, how he became the Buddha. And there's one story in the book, and I don't remember the exact details, but I was crossing a bridge over this raging river, and I don't remember if it was him or if somebody else fell into the river. And the river was just rapids. There were rocks and all kinds of things in the river, but the person who fell in the river was trying to hold on to the rocks and was drowning because the water was just flooding down their lungs and their mouth, and because they were holding on to the force of that water. And then they were trying to hang on to the branches on the banks of the river, which they couldn't hold on to. And so the river is a metaphor for life, of being in the flow. And having a goal or some sort of intention of where we want to go, what we want to manifest in our lives, is important, because that's the only thing we need to focus on. We don't need to know the way of how we're going to get there, the why. Not the why, the how is not really important. So as soon as you let go, and it is a process of letting go, and trying to hold on to things or trying to control things. I mean, nobody could control a raging river of how it flows. So what do? You let go, and you flow with the water, and miraculously you will see yourself weave around those rocks or whatever, and it will take you to where you're supposed to go. And that's a metaphor for life, of how we live our life. When we try to hold on to things that don't serve us anymore, we drown in that. It creates stress and other things. In my own life, personally, many years ago, I'm an avid scuba diver. I have been for years. In fact, that was part of my research training at university. I was doing marine natural products research. So we had to be trained with deep water certification, research, rescue, all kinds of things. And I did all my training at Hopkins Marine Station in Monterey Bay, California, which is across the bay from University of California at Santa Cruz. But anyway, in preparing for a field expedition, we decided to do a dive there locally in actually Carmel. That's just south of Monterey there on the water. And it was a really beautiful place to do a kelp dive. And by the way, diving off the California coast there in Northern California is really cold. It's like 55-degree temperatures for the water. So of course you're in full wetsuit the whole bit. It borderlines in some times of the year of being in a dry suit, to be honest, because it does get quite chilly. So, but we were going to go to this place called Butterfly House. It's a cove surrounded by a cliff and a bunch of rocks. And we did that only because we were looking for a beach entry to go out and dive on a kelp bed. And the reality was there had been a storm the day before or a couple of days before that. And so some of the beaches were still really rough and we couldn't enter there. So we chose to go here, knowing, of course, that this is a notorious place where divers have drowned and because the conditions change very quickly there. Well, long story short, things changed really quickly. There was 3 of us. We had somebody on the beach to notify in case we got in trouble, which I did in this case. I didn't have enough weight to go down, but my other 2 buddies with me, they didn't fare much better, and they had their own journey, so to speak, on this experience. But for me, I couldn't dive down, and I was on the surface of the water, and that's when suddenly everything got really rough. The waves were crashing over the rocks way over my head, behind me, and I was being pulled out in front of that. And so there was this kind of outcropping and other rocks where I was to the right, I was trying to get to in between. But I wasn't making any headway because the tide was pulling me out so strongly, it was very difficult. So again, water is really powerful. Nature is very powerful in this instance. So in much like the metaphor of the story, I went against my training, which was you don't ditch your tank or your BC, your buoyancy compensator. You hold on to that because you want to be able to stay afloat and whatever. But it was a lot of weight when you're on the surface of the water getting banged around. And one wave had taken off my mask and took it away. And then I was on the rocks, this big rock outcropping to the right, and I was trying to hold on there. It was very slick with algae, and I was just going getting pulled around the front. So I thought at first, when you're in a situation like this was a life and death situation, near-death experience, and you think, oh no, I'm really in trouble here. And I signaled to the guy on the beach. I saw him run off. That's the last thing I saw. And when I realized that I was in trouble and I wasn't going to make it back to the shore. But I did end up ditching my weights, everything, to where I was just in my wetsuit. And this is counter to your training. You're not supposed to do that because you're supposed to try and dive down. Well, that was my problem. I couldn't. But I decided, okay, in a split second there, I decided, okay, I'm going to get rid of all that and I'm going to ride the wave, surf the wave. And as the wave came crashing over the rocks, I rode it at the wave until I went up to the other rocks and spread eagle, and the water just cushioned me softly right there when it went right up against the rocks. And then as it came down in between the two crests, then I paddled like crazy to get out to this middle part here, which was a lower part, which it was low tide now. You could see all the rocks. And I don't know how much, it took a long time to do that, going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But I was slowly making headway in there until I got around the front of that rock outcropping, and then I wasn't being pulled around in front of it. But when I got to the shore, to the rocks, I was so drained with energy because the water was so cold and everything that I couldn't even stand up to walk out of there. So I crawled for, I don't know, 50 yards maybe to get around to a safe place and lean up against there. The funny part of the story is that as I was getting to that point, I just leaned up against the rocks and I was exhausted. Some guy, a lifeguard, comes running up to me with his little shorty and the cushion thing and says, "Hey, are you all right?" And I said, "Well, I am now." I was like, "Where were you like 30 minutes ago, man?" And then the long story short, they would get up there, it was all the emergency vehicles, it was TV news crews in my face. I mean, it was crazy. So that's my personal story for that, about really going with the flow, because like in life, you have to do that because things change quickly. And when they do, you have to be able to go with the flow of that and pivot. And so for reflecting on that, resistance equates to drowning, and flow equates to trust and survival, in this case, and transformation. Because you change from an experience like that when that happens to you, then you realize what's truly important in your life, what really matters. So let's jump into flow as a leadership principle, okay? And there's 4 pillars that we can align with, and call it conscious leadership or whatever. I want to come up with a different term for that because it's a little bit more than that. Because it's really about the journey within more than it is about organizational outside of you, how you run an organization. So for me, these are the internal pillars that you need to develop or understand at least, or identify with, that constitute these flow as a leadership principle. So the first is awareness, right? Seeing the obstacles as part of the flow, not blockages. So for me, obviously, and for Siddhartha, falling in the river and running up against the rocks, those rocks were blockages because he was holding on to them. Same for me when I was trying to hold on to the rock and not get taken out in front of that and get smashed on the rocks was again a blockage for me. I had to let go. And it requires a lot of trust and faith to do that too as well. If you think about it, like, wow, if I let go, I'm probably going to die. That's the root fear that's in there. But that's not necessarily true. So awareness is a key content pillar here in terms of thinking about this. The second is resilience, right? So it's being flexible like water and adapting without losing essence, right? So adapting to the situation, and my situation in that case was really going with the flow of the water and being flexible with that, and not adapting, but adapting to the situation, just like Siddhartha falling in the water, adapting to the raging river and realizing that he needed to let go. Same for me. The third thing is integrity. Really important. And this ties into authenticity as well. If you're a leader and you're leading teams or whatever, this is really important. And I've led many teams over the years, and I've always, and also taught at university, and that's how I would lead my students in terms of talking about how to move through the course and life in general. But that's standing by your word, okay? Water is true to its nature. You can't change the essence of water. You can't because it's a liquid, it falls through your hands. You can try and compress it or whatever, and it squeezes out, whatever. So water is the ultimate example of integrity. It stays true to its nature. And it's a powerful force, all right? The fourth thing is timing. So choosing the right moment as well. the Tao teaches harmony with the present, right? And with the way of things. So in essence, I moved into the way of the Tao in my critical situation, a life and death situation, where I moved into this place and trusted in the process and was able to think how to get out of it in a moment's notice. And this is this harmony with nature. So I became one with nature in that sense, because I was flowing with the waves back and forth easily, with no harm to myself, except exhaustion at the end. But that's okay. And in terms of how we apply this in business, whatever, leaders who resist change, I've seen plenty of them. They don't want to change the way they do things. That I've seen big companies, multi-billion-dollar companies, don't want to change the way they do things. And unfortunately, a lot of companies get to this point, and it's only as good as the leadership there, because the writing's on the wall, but yet they still resist the change of what they need to do. As opposed to the leaders who flow with it, who know that change is inevitable, but the suffering is optional. So those leaders flow with it, okay? Now let's talk about the energy of flow. Flow is not passivity, okay? Let's make clear that distinction. It doesn't mean that you're just passive and you let things happen to you. No, it's a conscious, intentional movement with life, okay? It's not passive. So when you become one with the way of things and all that you're doing, you can pivot much easier and go and take the inspired action that's revealed to you to continue on your journey, okay? The second thing is that there's a paradox here, right? So if we think about water, water is soft, right? It can overcome the hardness of rock. I mean, look at the Grand Canyon. Look at I look at the beaches in Florida. When my favorite place to go is out in Honeymoon Island and Clearwater Beach, and the beach is constantly changing. And then when we have a hurricane or a really strong storm come through, it changes the whole beach, the way it looks. It transforms it. Now, man tries to go back and fill it in with sand and try and build it back out, whatever, but that's a losing battle, because the water is always going to win, all right? And it can overcome the hardest rock and erode it to where nothing is there, till it's just sand. Okay, so this is a paradox if you think about it. So this softness of going with the flow in your life and doing all that in your life, in business and whatever you're doing, keep in mind that this is much more powerful. Just like the forces of nature are so much more powerful than anything hard or rigid that's in place there. And the energetics, okay? There's an energy to this flow. And not only, you will feel it within yourself, but others will feel when you're in the flow versus when you're forcing it. When you're trying to resist change, or you're trying to make it work a certain way, but you're not being adaptive or pivoting to that change. And again, remember, resistance is drowning. I think this is probably the hardest part for most people to do, is this letting go part, and trust in the process and have faith. These are subjective things for us to energetically that's hard to quantify or understand. I guess it is to think of it that way. Maybe that's why we're resistant to do that, because we don't really know what's going to happen. We have to trust. We just have to say, okay, I got to do it. Well, I didn't really know what was going to happen when I let go of all my gear and dumped it on the rocks out there, which is probably still sitting out there, before I had to figure out how to get out of the situation I was in. So again, being in this flow when you're forcing it is going to cause you to drown. And flow creates influence. It creates innovation. It creates trust in leadership. So you can influence your teams, other people, that your family members, friends, whatever, to think of things in a different way when you're in the flow, yourself. Remember, this is an internal journey. Okay, it's not external. It's an internal journey that we all must take. It also leads to the greatest innovations and discoveries. And I can give many examples of that in my own life. We don't have time to go through that today. But also in history, historically, there's been many examples of this where, all the greatest discoveries happened not going from point A to point B, but it was the journey on the way that gave the inspiration for that innovation or what happened. And it builds trust. Because then if you are confident in the flow and adapting to that, that's going to come through energetically for those around you, and that creates trust. Okay. So let's talk about some practices for living in the flow. Okay. And the first is just a daily reflection I want you to ask yourself. And that is, where am I resisting today? Where am I resisting today? Whatever's going on in your life today, ask yourself this every day, because we do, by nature of our egos or whatever, we resist doing things or making decisions to do things. I still do it sometimes, where I know I want to go do this one thing, but I'm resistant to do it because maybe it's going to take a little more work, or I think it does, or whatever my mind made up to think about that is not true. It's an illusion. So, I love my grandmother, bless her heart. She's passed away many years now, but she was probably the ultimate networker, impromptu person. And she was the wife of my grandfather, who was an Episcopal minister. And I remember going to, I think it was the parish hall. There were a lot of people in there, or it was a party or something. And she's taking me around, introduced me as her grandson, whatever. And oh, this is so and so, like that. And I'd ask her afterwards, say, Grandma, how do you know these people? She said, oh, I just met them like 5 minutes ago. But you would never know that by the way she presented it. She was totally in the flow and impromptu, and she would ask us when we go visit when we were kids, is like, okay, what do you guys want to do today? Do you want to go do oil painting? When do you want to go fishing? Do we want to go to the beach? And, whatever you said, boom, she got everything together, packed a lunch, and you were going to do it. So that's a great way to live life, in my opinion. So don't resist anything. Just go do it. I guess that's why people over the years have called me a Renaissance man, because they say, hey, Bill, is there anything you can't do? Because I would just go do things, all kinds of stuff, and that I'd never done before, and loved it. It was fun. So the second thing is, for another practice, is breath and meditation, of course. This should be part of your daily spiritual practice. And think of the breath as like a river, as you're breathing in and breathing out and doing that. And that's what I did when I was in that flow of going back and forth between the crest of the waves and pushing myself up against the rocks, and was breathing into that as well. So again, breath and meditation energetically moves you to this place of really being one with all things and with the way of things. The third thing is reframing. So again, whatever challenges you're being faced with, which are look difficult, just reframe them as currents to navigate. Okay, they're not walls to climb. They're currents that you're going to navigate. Imagine you're on that raging river floating down. Just relax and float, and take that inspired action to where it needs to go, and reframe it, the situation. Reframe it. Okay, change your perspective. From a neuroplasticity point of view, this reprograms your brain to look in a different way, creates less stress, that sort of thing. And the last thing is leadership practice. Okay, you want to encourage adaptability and gentleness, just like water, in the teams and the people that you're around you, and who you're working with. So again, those are the practices for living in the flow. So take some time, starting with, where am I resisting today? Ask yourself that question, because when you do prompt that question, then the answer will come to you, and you'll know. Maybe it may not be in your conscious awareness, but it doesn't feel right energetically where you're sitting because of what's going on in your life. It's like, okay, take a moment to pause, meditate, and say, hey, where am I resisting today? and deal with that and look at how to move through that. So here's some reflections for you to think about on your own. I have three questions for you to prompt your thinking here. First is, where in your life or business are you resisting instead of flowing? So similar to what we were saying about where am I resisting today, but let's look at a bigger picture of that. Is that where in my life or business am I resisting instead of flowing? And you'll know when you ask that question to the universe, and it'll come back to you. The second question is, what might happen if you let go and trusted the current? So think about the possibilities of what could happen if you did let go and you trusted in the current. And a lot of times we don't see it until hindsight is always 20/20, of course. But if you have some vision, any visionary aspect to yourself, which probably many of you do, but don't trust it, sit with that and think about what would happen if you let go and you just move with the current of that change, whatever it is, or challenge. The third question is, what qualities of water, gentleness, persistence, adaptability, can you embody in your everyday life and what you're doing? So where can you embody more gentleness, more persistence, more adaptability to that? And I think probably in terms of spiritual principles, and I've kind of touched on this already, I think, this leap of faith, I actually think of the movie with Indiana Jones and the one with the Crusades and trying to find the Holy Grail, right? And remember, they were in that cliff or mountainside, and it looked like there was no way to get across to the other side because it was an illusion of the stone bridge that was there. And so he figured out that, in the book that they showed his father had, looked like a knight was holding the grail and leaping across the chasm there. And the reality was there was a bridge there, but it was a metaphor for having faith and stepping into that, and know that you're upheld, that you're okay, and that you'll be able to move through that. So this gentleness, persistence, adaptability is about being in the flow of moving through all of that. So I want to close with the following. Living in the flow aligns us with nature, with truth, in leadership that inspires. It's a powerful place to be in that energetic flow. You have that energy, like I did when I was in that critical situation. I didn't have it never entered into my mind that I gave up and oh no, I'm gonna die, and I just gave in. No, it was a persistence there, but there was a knowing energetically, because I was aligned with nature and truth and leadership. In that example with myself, I was aligned with those principles. So I went with the flow of the way of things, which is what the 8th verse is really talking about. And if you don't have the Tao, I recommend you go get it, and then you can read these different verses and do the same sort of thing in terms of and applying those principles to your life, because they are time-made. It's ancient wisdom, but it applies today. So again, living in the flow aligns us with nature, with truth, and leadership that inspires. And that's where we all want to be, don't we? So that's it for this episode of Beyond Limits, where spirit meets science. So again, follow me on social media. You can go to my website at drbillclark.life. I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and X. You can follow me on any of those platforms, your choice, to do that. And again, go get my book if you haven't gotten it yet. And and check it out because some powerful wisdom there. And then stay tuned for news on the new book that's coming. And I'm almost to the point of I've got the outline, and I'm compiling it from like the 80 talks and podcasts I've done over the years. So I am targeting before the end of the year, maybe before Christmas. It'll be a great Christmas gift to put in somebody's stocking. So it'll be ready. That's my goal. And that's about it for today. And I'll join you. Maybe we'll have next Sunday again. I don't know. I'm going to be really focused on finishing this book and compiling that. But we'll see what happens. And we'll jump in a few more episodes before the end of the year for sure. So with that, I wish you a wonderful week. I'm Dr. Bill with love and gratitude. Take care.